Hello, I'm Stuart Bowes, and you're watching or listening to the Net Hero podcast. This is a podcast for you if you care about what we're doing to the planet. You don't have to be an eco-warrior. We believe business is the solution to making things better. But we're for people who want to make that difference by either cutting their emissions or coming up with ideas that can help us do things a bit better. We've featured politicians, academics, lots and lots of business people, entrepreneurs, inventors, and of course people who are just interested in doing the right thing. So sit back, listen and enjoy, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Please share it with your friends and colleagues, and you can always check out our two websites that cover all of this, Energy Live News and futurenetzero.com. This podcast is purely editorial, so sit back and enjoy this week's episode. Now, on something called Future Net Zero, you'd think net zero is what we're all about, and we are. But you could not have not noticed the, I wouldn't say shift, or maybe murmurs that's going on in the whole net zero sector. You've had reports about the future of the pace of it, the cost of it. You've had Tony Blair, the ex-Prime Minister, saying that in its current form, it's going to be a disaster because people will reject it. You've had the rollbacks on the EV targets. We've had problems with trying to get our homes more efficient. We've had lots and lots of people saying that actually the pace of this is either going too fast or going too slow, but it doesn't matter which way it's going. It's costing far more than we ever really thought about when we committed to this back in 2019. Now, I don't think net zero is dead, and neither is my guest this week on the podcast, but is it being done the right way? And one of the major things that government's doing under old Ed Miliband is trying to push forward massive supply side generation. So building more solar farms, building more wind turbines, all of that stuff. And that means the planning and infrastructure bill, which says we're going to build, and you may have read it, hopefully you have, that, you know, if you live near one of these developments, we'll give you a bit of money, but face facts, this is what's going to happen. Is this the right way to go? Well, Tony Day is my guest today, and he's an energy expert, a researcher, a campaigner. He's been everywhere. He's been teaching. He's been at universities, worked for DESNZ on projects, and he worked in the commercial sector. Tony, you go back a long way. You're still looking very sharp. I'd like to say that as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure I feel it, but there we go. Yeah, we try.
How are you? Good?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Let's just talk about this. First of all, you're not against renewable energy and net zero, are you?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I've been a campaigner for renewables. I was teaching renewable energy to building services students in 1992, and they all thought I was a bit mad. And then, you know, come the year 2000, I said, well, look, this is really going to take off, and here we are, and it is taking off. And it's in a way, it's careful what you wish for, because it's gone in directions that I didn't expect PV to. I thought the wind sector would probably go where it's gone, but PV is really taking off because the price has come down so much.
The issue with a lot of this is what I said in the intro just then, is that the idea of it, I don't think anyone would disagree with, right? Everyone wants to have a better planet that's less polluted. But the cost implications are now really starting to bite. And COVID's been a factor, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been a factor, but globally you can see it. One of the other things that's happening is government, just this week we're recording this podcast, and the Great British Energy has been given the go-ahead. You know, it's been acted into law, 8 billion quid of our money going to try and encourage more development. You've got a particular bugbear about the way we're trying to push forward on solar and many other things which we'll discuss. But let's talk about solar. The government really believes there should be much more solar, and a lot of it is earmarked for farmland, because let's face it, farmers can get much more better returns by having a solar farm on it. Campaign for Protection of Rural England, or I think they call CPRE these days, they've worried about it. Other people have said this isn't right, but the government says they're all being NIMBYs. What's your take on this kind of rush to build masses of huge solar farms? I think you're near one yourself, aren't you, that's due to come online?
That's right. Just near us, there's going to be a 1,500 hectare, 500 megawatt solar farm That's about the size of Heathrow Airport, the footprint of Heathrow Airport.
Wow.
And it will be around about five villages and supply, well, notionally, it supplies about 195,000 people. It sits on top of the Chalk Aquifer that also provides 195,000 people with all of their drinking water. And so there are a whole heap of risks that are not being factored in to the way these solar farms are being developed. So I have concerns, and as we've looked into the impact that's going to have on the local area, and we start talking to other of the nationally strategic infrastructure projects, the NSIP solar farms. There are a number of these now, about 25, I think, in
Yeah.
process around the UK. So we're talking a lot to them, and the impacts. Everybody's really concerned about the impacts and the fact that there is very little democratic accountability for the local communities. They have very little say. There are some nods to yes, there's a non-statutory consultation, and you can say this, and we'll take your thoughts on board. But we have no evidence that those are being taken on board. So by going for the NSIP process, where the Secretary of State makes a decision,
Yeah.
you are removing the ability of local authority and democratic accountability for communities to have a say, and the planning regime to actually take its course. And I can understand the government wants to speed things up, but in actually they want to increase the level of the NSIP cap so that local authorities can actually do things because they think they can do that faster. So there's some dichotomies here, but the big things that really concern me is we've got this. I don't know what the financials are on this particular
Yeah.
solar farm, but something in the region of £600 million worth of investment. That's going to be private sector investment. That helps the government because it's not taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
It's private sector investment. But what we don't know is who these investors are. So we talk about growth in the UK, but a lot of these are overseas investors. This money is coming from and some of it is very opaque, but but some of it's proven to be overseas investment, and that means that that's not necessarily going to be money that flows back into the UK economy. So the growth economy in the green sector, it's supposed to be green growth, but it doesn't help with that. Now, the other bit to this is therefore large money, big investment in concentrated assets. I understand the financial efficiency of that, but
Hmm.
it's then goes they rent the land from local landowners
Yes.
who've owned the land for centuries, and they don't have to farm anymore, and they get something like £1,500 per acre. So money flows. The benefits flow from big money to wealthy landowners, and the community are cut out of the consultation around planning process, and they get no guaranteed benefits. The government are talking about guaranteed benefit schemes, but none of these in England, at least in England and Wales, they haven't come in yet. So the local communities are definitely cut out of this. Whereas if you had ground-mounted solar that was perhaps community-owned at the sub 50 megawatt level, and there are plenty of these, one down the road from us here, but there's plenty of these all over East Anglia, and those models can actually be a little bit more embedded in the local economy. The trouble is when you have an area the size of Heathrow then turned over to solar panels, some of it will actually be signed over to for biodiversity net gain. That's true.
Yeah.
There will
Okay.
be more wild spaces within that, but it will be lost to agriculture. Now, some say that that's probably not a bad thing. Others would say, but this is the breadbasket of England, so we're losing good agricultural land. The planning or the plans always say, these developments always say, but we will return the land to its former use in 40 years' time. Well, why would they? In 40 years' time, we're still going to need energy. We'll have probably 50% or maybe 40% efficient solar panels or some technology that we can replace them with and get even more energy out to power more data centers for more AI that's going to be. I don't want to sound cynical about it.
You're on a roll here, Tony. I like it. People say this is exactly why they want to cut these planning red tape because people like you object because you don't want it near you. And I can get that, right? I don't think I'd like a solar farm in the back of my garden, but they would say if you're in China, they just dam a river, right? And they go for it, and it's a very different way, and that's where they've been going. And the government's trying to say there's plenty of land here which we could use to create much more homegrown energy, clean energy. What's not to like? Yes, you might be inconvenienced, but that's the price that some of us have to pay. How do you answer the kind of NIMBY argument that we've thrown back at
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, it's a good one, and it's difficult, and it's one that I wrestle with
Yeah.
because there's one on my doorstep. However, I am not I do wouldn't object to a 50 megawatt solar farm close to us. We have a wind farm on what counts for the highest hill in Cambridgeshire. Right. I'm looking at a turbine now. It's fact they're very elegant, they're lovely, but of course solar can actually you can pack it in much more
Mm.
densely and you get a higher yield per hectare. So actually, I can understand the business sense and the financial efficiency and all of that thing. But if you alienate communities and if you change the local economy so much, there will be no farmers in 40 years' time. That you cannot return it back to farming because there will be no history of farming here, and nobody will know how to do it. It will not be farmland anymore. It will become industrial landscape. We will be eroding rural landscape, and that biodiversity net gain that we say we might get. You cannot get lapwings and skylarks on the fields. I know this is open agriculture and it's a bit of a green desert and all the rest of it, but there are lapwings, there are skylarks, there are brown hares in abundance, and I cannot see how the biodiversity net gain plan. Apparently, solar farms are very good for pigeons. Well, we have more pigeons than blades of grass, and they don't need our help. But the lapwings and the yellowhammers and the linnets and the brown hares, they do. So we have to be very careful about how we do it. So I'm not saying none of this. What I'm saying is be cautious and do it that brings the community with you in
Yes.
ways that the community understand its benefits, that do not turn the local economy completely on its head and destroy that way of life. I'm not trying to be very Thomas Hardy nostalgic
No,
about
no, I think you're making a very fair point. This is a very, very crucial point. And the reason I wanted you on is because you've got to take people with you. And I fear that what we're doing now is not taking people with us, right? Buy EVs, but they're expensive. No, just do it. Charging will come, right? Oh, let's just get heat pumps. Well, they're great, but they cost so much. Get solar panels. And the idea of building these solar farms on Greenbelt, and even if you build it urbanly, there's a lot going on there. The government has tried to do this. You know the score about the planning bill, which is this is critical infrastructure. We've got to stop it. Even Starmer said there are too many delays holding these sort of things back. And by the way, we'll give you 250 quid a year or whatever, 500 quid a year to live near one of these. The recent survey said people don't even want the money. They'd rather not have the thing. So how do we take the public with us? And I understand your point, and I agree with you on this, but there's a balance here for government, which is they want this infrastructure, particularly green infrastructure. It involves footfall. It involves, if you're talking apart from offshore, being near people.
and that's absolutely right. So, as I say, I am not objecting to the fact that we have some ground-mounted solar, and we need to have this. I mean, and the CPRE, you mentioned
Yeah.
CPRE. If we could, I mean, the market economics are already there. Rooftop solar, we should be doing it, and it
Yes.
doesn't add to the house builder's costs in any extensive way. And we could be doing this. It is more expensive to put it on roofs. There was a debate in Parliament yesterday, and one of the MPs made the point: rooftop solar is something like double the price of ground-mounted solar, and
Yeah.
car park solar is double again. So I understand that cost, but here are the arguments that where I think it starts to become very interesting, very convoluted. And you talk about price, the cost of all of this. Well, often there are a lot of the anti-campaign groups, and we've seen after the recent elections, and we've seen some of those campaign groups now have a much louder voice, and they're going to much more anti-net zero positions.
Yes.
That
Yes.
is and that's going to be more vociferous. This is having a backlash against the policy, and I fear the government is beginning to shoot itself in the foot. On price, a lot of that anti-net zero argument is solar is too expensive. Well, we know it's cheaper than any other form, pretty much, and actually putting it in large scale on fields is the cheapest way of deploying it, and that's absolutely right. And yet the argument is it's too expensive. Well, partly because it's costing 60 million to put a wire between the fields here and Burwell South, where there'll be a new grid supply point. Those infrastructure costs are where the uplift is going to come
Yeah.
potentially on our bills. But actually, we could start to clean out some of the. There are whole things around pricing actually not being linked to the price of gas and all the rest of it that we can actually affect the price of electricity to the consumer without it becoming too expensive. But the arguments are, well, solar's rubbish, its load factor's rubbish. I'm just rehearsing some of these. But therefore, we need more nuclear. Nuclear is at least 4 times the price of solar and climbing, and this is going to go ahead at something like probably 10 times the price of PV. So the pricing argument is the alternatives are actually more expensive. So solar, we can't necessarily say that solar is going to be too expensive. It isn't necessarily. So the idea that we should spend a little bit more money putting it on rooftops and car parks is actually a bit of a misnomer. We can handle that cost. The only trouble is who's buying that, who's investing in that.
Yeah.
Where you can have these major investors, some of them opaque, doing large scale assets, or you have distributed generation with distributed investment. That's a trickier issue for the government to handle. Do you do that with subsidy? Do you do that with other pricing mechanisms? I think you can do it with intelligent pricing mechanisms and regulation, and the regulation that then compels better efficiency of homes. Well, it's always been planned. 2016 we were going to have zero carbon homes. We're now a decade on, and we're hopefully going to have the future homes. If that's for new building, we need to do similar for the really difficult area of retrofit of buildings. And I've got a heat pump in my 200-year-old cottage here. Works like a dream. I'm saving 5 tons of carbon. Very proud of it. We have an EV, so we've gone all electric. We were on oil before.
Cool. Okay.
Actually, the switch was a no-brainer here. It's harder. I've been doing some research on heat pump retrofits. It is harder to do that and financially, but the government's put commitment to that, and that's great. And they increased the heat pump commitment. But if we could invest more in skills to put these technologies in, the bigger the army of installers out there who are highly skilled and do the job right first time, put a heat pump in right first time, it is brilliant. Put it in wrong, and people will get upset. No, this technology doesn't work, and it makes it into the media and all the rest of it. But we all know those stories. I can guarantee if you put it in right and you get a good installer, you will not have problems. So heat pumps are just fridges, and nobody complains about having a fridge in their house.
They don't.
So I think if we had a reshifting of the policy focus, this is kind of my pipe dream, if you like, the reshifting of the policy focus to the end of the wire, get the efficiency improved, you can start to get all of the costs in the system down. Yes, it might cost you a little bit more to put more embedded PV across a distributed investment, but actually, if you can get all of the costs down, you start to get a much more efficient system. And UK PLC actually then starts to benefit because it doesn't have 60 million for that connection cost, 100 million for that other connection cost. Oh, we've got to bury the wires because that's a very sensitive land over there. So there are ways, I think, in which we can be more ambitious. Now, I've spoken to a lot of people about this and said, yes, but it's still not enough. And I think we could do more work to understand how we can make it enough. And I think we just need more ambition. Energy efficiency, and you and I probably know this, energy efficiency, it's always been the fifth fuel, and nobody's ever really
done enough on it.
Strongly enough in it. But we could, if do the focus on that, we would need fewer of these farms out here.
Do you think what's going on right now, the backlash that I talked about, right at the beginning, I mentioned Tony Blair's paper, which actually I've read. I mean, some people said it's been fiddled a bit, false science, whatever. But actually, the argument it's fairly convincing to me. I mean, the reality is you cannot do things. Okay, no, let me rephrase that. You can do things by just saying law, right? So I remember my dad used to drive around in the 70s, no seatbelt. Then they put the law in, everyone had to do it, and it did save a lot more lives. So you could say there are rules for legislation. But when it comes to this kind of big asset stuff, the wind turbines, the solar farms, nuclear, whatever. Is there a fundamental problem here that you just outlined, which is we're so much thinking about the big infrastructure because also that's where the money can come. Pension funds will go, that's a big thing. We'll invest in that. That we're just ignoring the society, putting solar out there, using small hubs, using brownfield sites. And actually, that is harder to do for the government because it's a lot easier to say, I'm going to give planning permission for something big, than to go, let's go and take 10,000 homes and do something there. What's the issue that's stopping us doing the right thing? Is it simply convenience, political convenience, dare I say?
I think it's political will. I think it's convenience. I think it is the investment pathways. So, how are you going to invest in that distributed energy system and the energy efficiency? It's expensive to make it a zero carbon Victorian end of terrace house. I mean, it's really because exterior insulation, all the rest of it costs a lot of money, and people cannot necessarily afford that. So where's that money going to come from? Does that come from central government? I don't know, but I just think this is where things like sovereign wealth funds
Yeah.
come into their own, and other countries have done that. We didn't. We ran down North Sea gas without actually banking any of it. We just spent it as we went, and we haven't got the. But we could have invested much better in the future by improving our housing stock back then. Well, that's a could have. So, I mean, there must be I would think, more intelligent ways in which we can start to attract funding mechanisms that can do this. But that requires political will, and I'm not an economist. I don't know how that's done, but technically it can be done. Technically, these things cost less when you start to do them at scale, and
Yeah.
you will be creating jobs to do it. You will have fewer jobs on large scale.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah.
They come, they install, they go away, nothing happens for 40 years. I mean, a little bit of maintenance, 3 or 4 guys come around and do a little bit of maintenance once in a while. It's a very little. And unless you have a battery energy storage fire and then it contaminates the water course, and then we have a big problem on our hands. But otherwise, we're going to lose all the agricultural jobs. The local economy will suffer unless somebody really thinks about it. On the other hand, the distributed army of skills, that's real jobs, that grows the economy. And I cannot understand, that was the kind of vision I thought this government might have been looking at. Maybe it still is, but it needs to actually, why can't it focus on that and show the advantages? So I just think that there's another model, and we have to be really cautious about how, once we've sold this land, it's gone. It will be gone forever. And the alternative is it can be much more flexible, much more adaptable, and change with time according to need. And if you have curtailment in the summer when you have too much solar of a large asset, that's going to undermine its business model. But if you have distributed energy systems, well, the curtailment happens in the places where the demand has dropped, or the battery energy storage can soak that up, or whatever. And you probably will have better load management and better load factors across the system if you have a distributed energy system. I haven't done the modeling. But my gut tells me that that's what happens when I see how people use their local energy systems on their rooftop PVs. So I understand it is not as cost effective as the large scale assets, but it is much more equitable, and it is much more prone to providing growth and jobs in the longer term. And that requires political courage to say, okay, we need to do this investment to do that. I understand there is very little money for any investment, but
Well, you say that, and then they found 8 billion for this,
yeah.
this thing that's existing as in a little back office in the back of Aberdeen, but who knows what the hell it's doing right now.
And that is why I'm very keen to have this debate. I might be wrong, I could be shot down in flames, but I'm very keen to start a debate to saying, can we have the will? Because we know technically we can solve this thing.
Of course.
And everybody's saying, well, hydrogen's too expensive. I mean, CCS, unproven and very expensive. Small modular nuclear reactors, as yet unproven and not commercially viable. Well, how much is it going to cost to build those across the middle of the country to power all the data centers and all the rest of it? I don't know how that's going to happen. Certainly not going to happen in the next 10 years. That's a 20, 30, 40-year program, at least. So we need to do an awful lot of stuff now. Let's start on the energy efficiency, get the demand down, wean ourselves off how much gas we need to import, and avoid ruining the farmland and the rural communities' ways of life, and destroying those local economies. I just think that that's probably, if the government could be imaginative around how to solve that, that's good because they are taking the easier route.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because, I am a big fan. I'll admit, I think the idea of power, big power stations is good. I like the idea of kind of nuclear. I like the idea of a mix of generation. But you make a very interesting point because these things take time. They go through lots of planning and they also need a lot of funding. Perhaps the funding model is the problem because you will get funding for that. If then someone says, oh, by the way, 200,000 homes in Hertfordshire, we need to start putting solar panels on them. Think like, well, the guy won't like it. There'll be all of this. Well, hey, I'm not going to make much money. Whereas if I stick it on there, I know that I've got it and the government will back it. Is the future of, with the grid trying to prepare already, the formation of NISO and all things have happened. You talk about, the patch you're in, UK Power Networks, I know them quite well. They've created a DSO. Is the grid going to be ready to do all of this as well? Because you've made some very good points about kind of distributed versus kind of the big singular builds. But at the end of the day, if we're going to have any of this working, the grid's got to be able to become a two-way thing so that your solar panels can feed back and then we can balance it. Is there enough being done on that in your view, looking at where things are?
I don't know what's happening at the DSO level. But certainly what we're seeing in terms of these large scale NSIP projects and obviously the offshore wind as well and bringing the offshore energy onshore, it's all about transmission grid upgrade. And those costs, as I say, 60 million for 16 kilometers or something like that. That's a guess, but it's going to be in that order. Though we could avoid a lot of those transmission upgrades. We can't do that for the offshore wind. That's going to,
that's a different case. Yeah, I get it.
But we could avoid a lot of that transmission upgrade, and maybe the focus needs to go into the distributed system. And yes, there are areas, and probably at villages like this, who would struggle to have every village move to a heat pump, and there might need to be upgrades. But let's story. A group that I ran in Ireland. We had an electrical research group in Cork at the IERC that I headed up, and that team did some work on virtual power plants in Cork, actually in Dingle, and they showed with heat pumps, rooftop PV, and batteries, they could get the electricity bills of the houses that were involved in that. This is real data, real time data, down by 20%.
Wow.
That's validated. They've published that work in Nature. So this is not a bit part sort of a walk on park paper. I think this is real findings, properly validated. It's been peer reviewed. 20% savings. And I remember talking to the chair of AirGrid saying you really need to look at the opportunities that you can get with virtual power plants because you can reduce the transmission costs, the build costs that you're expecting to the more remote parts. We should be looking at these smart systems. They work. And they can be very, very cost effective. There's a business model in that, but also the ultimate benefit goes to the consumer because the bills come down by 20%. Now that means the energy flows in the network are reduced.
Yeah.
Now there might be two-way flows, but your peak demands, which is what the cable sizing is all about, have come down, and so you can manage those costs of distributed network by smarter systems. Again, more work needs to be done how you do that at scale, but we can avoid these costs if we know how to do it. In fact, Innovate UK has been funding lots of smart grid and smart network projects that are looking exactly what these potential business models can be doing. The technology potential here for the UK to have this smart knowledge is huge, and the benefits accrue to the whole of society. The benefits of solar on large swathes of agricultural land benefit a very few people, to my mind, apart from the fact, of course, you can get the carbon savings, but do we get enough carbon savings? I still don't know. I'd like to see the modelling of how that curtailment in the summer. NISO is predicting peak summer loads of less than 13 gigawatts, and yet we want 40 gigawatts of solar NSIP solars by 2030, 70 by 2035. But when the sun's shining most, we're only going to have 13 gigawatts of demand. So, will battery storage be able to smooth that out and keep the business model alive? I don't know, and I'd be very interested to see how that modelling would pan out. So there's a lot of complexity in all of this, and it's policy, it's about regulation and compelling. It's about where the money's going to come from, what's the most cost efficient way of doing it, and what's equitable to society, and what will bring society with you. Because at the moment, the shift is beginning to go the other way. Tony Blair's intervention, I think the timing was unhelpful for the government because they didn't respond as well as they could have done to that. It just they're like fox in the headlights to that one. But there are other proposals coming up from around the country of newly elected mayors that are far more radical. Let's frack. Let's just open up
Yeah,
this country
yeah.
to fracking, and well, that's going to take us in the opposite direction. So the backlash could be far worse in terms of climate objectives if we don't bring communities with us.
To end with, we have to take the public with us. You just mentioned that point. Do you think the public, not us, right? We're weird. We do this stuff all the time, but just normal people, they're seeing their food bills go up, they're seeing their energy bills go up, their cars cost. Well, actually, funny enough, the car costs have come down a bit for petrol. They see roads being dug up, they see these turbines going up, they get planning things saying, we're building this, we don't want it. Are we in danger of actually losing? Because a couple of years ago, nearly every person, particularly young people, were all for this. But I think, a lot of young people don't ever pay the bills, and they're quite lucky in that sense. But their parents' generation, the people who are older, I'm getting a feeling that people are thinking, we're not, what difference is it making? What difference is it making if China or India or America, particularly now, keeps chugging it out? Is the narrative of taking us all with it, the equitable narrative, are you worried it's slipping?
I am, because I hear that. I hear that on the wires out there from a lot of these campaign groups. I still think that's a minority view. I think that the UK saw itself in a leadership position on climate.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to be really proud of. It really did actually set a benchmark. Decarbonisation of the electricity network from whatever 900 grams a kilowatt hour when coal was on the system to under 100 now.
Incredible.
Now it's an extraordinary story that we've
Yeah.
decarbonised the grid, and what it means is everybody wants to use heat pumps to decarbonise. It's electrify heat, electrify transport, I was an editor for CIBSE technical memorandum on the electrification of buildings for net zero. And really that talked about these challenges. You're going to be moving all of these energy loads from
Yes.
forecourts and from the gas grid onto the electricity network. So we do need more electricity. How do we do that? It's a big technical and economic challenge. And do people understand that? No, they
No.
don't. Do they think that we've just got to do whatever we can because China's steaming well? Well, China is putting in more renewables than anything else.
Absolutely. All the time.
And so if India's ramping up its renewable deployment, there's absolutely no doubt that the direction of travel, if you look at all the IEA statistics of where energy build is happening, it is definitely moving towards renewables. A little bit of growth in nuclear, but fossil fuels are definitely declining. That might change, of course, in North America a bit, but that's probably only going to be
It's a glitch.
because
Yeah.
actually the direction of travel there, everybody's invested in clean energy, and so it's going to happen. It just needs to happen in a way that brings people with it. So I think the majority is still on board. I think the majority in the UK, I think it's 75% of people still believe in the net zero target, but they will lose interest, and they'll become apathetic if they feel it's not for them. And so if people are bought into it and sold, and it's brought with them and they're part of the journey, I think that they will not lose that apathy. The government hasn't got very long, I think, because it's in danger of sucking basically the joy out of things.
Yes.
Everything's so difficult. The rhetoric that they use on just about everything at the moment. Sorry, it's just got to be tougher and tougher. Well, actually, talk up the benefits, because the benefits could be huge, and they're necessary. And we're seeing a drought this year. It looks very much 2 millimeters of rain in March. I think about 11 millimeters of rain in April, and nothing on the horizon in May. So we might be seeing yet another event, and we only had one a couple of years ago. So we might be seeing some really extreme weather events, and people notice that. But the government has to get its policy right, and that's why I'm very keen. Even if it's a bit unpopular with the mainstream of the engineering community, to have a debate that says, hold on a second, can we do this better?
On that, I completely agree. Thank you so much for joining me, Tony. Really good to speak to you again after all these years.
Thank you very much, Simon. Excellent.
No, brilliant stuff. Let us know what you think. I really do feel that Tony's made some very salient points. Get in touch on social media. Let us know what you think. Remember, if you want to be on it, just email us nethero@futurenetzero.com. My thanks to Zoe for this week's production. Tony, thank you very much. See you on the next episode of the Net Hero podcast.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.